Let's take a moment now that we have set up and configured our DNS server to investigate some of the properties that can be managed, or in other words, some of the DNS options that can be set. Most of those will be set, most of the options will be set from the properties pages of either the server itself or of the lookup zones that you have configured. We'll start with a look at the properties pages of the server itself, and these can be investigated by right-clicking and choosing properties. Also remember, you can configure the DNS server as we showed you through the DNS server wizard. But we go to properties and we pull up the server's properties pages. And first of all, in the interfaces tab is where we specify what interfaces the DNS server service is listening on. So if you have a multi-homed computer, a computer with multiple network cards, you can be very specific about which IP addresses that the DNS server listens for DNS resolution requests as well as registration requests on. The forwarders tab we take a look at a little bit later on. Forwarders are, as explained here, servers that can resolve queries not answered by this server. From the advanced tab, you can set properties such as bind secondaries, whether or not to allow bind secondaries, enable scavenging of stale records. Bind is a Berkeley Internet domain system. It's Unix, and it's whether or not you would allow zone information to be sent to bind secondary servers. The root hints tab is a listing of all of the Internet's root level name servers. These can be added to, they can be edited. You can copy a list from a different server. There are times where you will configure a DNS server as the root level name server. Now this is done when you're in a private address space and you will not be resolving queries through the rest of the Internet hierarchy. In other words, your DNS server is the top of the Internet. It's just your own private little Internet. In that case, there won't be any name servers listed here, but under most circumstances, you're going to have a list of servers that is gotten from the DNS cache file that is included with Server 2003. Debug logging is where you set debug options, event logging, whether or not to log the following events. These are sent to the event viewer, which conveniently is also added to the DNS MMC console. And then finally, there's a monitoring tab where you can perform simple queries. Now, this is just really a look and just observation of some of the different things you can do. The problem we had with the transfer of files, the transfer of zone information from the primary server to the secondary zone file, which we did with the primary.net zone, actually serves as a nice little segue. Because in order to transfer zone information, investigate the properties of the zone itself, and now we're looking at the properties of the zone, not of the server. And this is actually where you'll be doing more configuration, not too much to do from the properties of the server. But from the general tab, it has the name, whether or not to allow dynamic updates. We take a look at that. Aging and scavenging is set here. We'll take a look at that as well. You can also change the zone type from primary to secondary, and you can also, if you are a domain controller, decide to configure it as an Active Directory integrated zone. So you can change the zone type from here. Start of authority, what's important here is really the serial number. The serial number, each time the zone information changes, the serial number of the file is incremented by 1. And when DNS servers talk to each other, they make sure that the serial numbers are in sync and the latest serial number is effective. It gets replicated to other DNS servers. You can increment this manually if you want to. Now, the problem that we ran into can be resolved through the Zone Transfers tab. This is a master zone. This is a primary zone, beanlake.org. And from the Zone Transfers tab is where we allow or don't allow zone transfers. Now, zone transfers to any server, only servers listed on the name servers tab, or only to the following servers. And what had happened in the previous module as we were setting up the zones is on the primary for primary.net, I did not have, this is the default by the way, I did not have this option checked. If you're in a domain, you should see all of the name servers listed that have the DNS server running. So in a domain, you're less likely to run across the temporary problem that we had in the last module when we're dealing with a workgroup type of scenario, but you can fix that, and this is what I did, by allowing zone transfers to any server. And then you can further configure this by choosing the Notify tab. Automatically notify servers listed on the Name Servers tab or the following servers. So this is something you might want to do in conjunction if you are implementing a DNS solution in a workgroup. So this lists the servers that are notified when there is a change to the serial number of the DNS zone file. Now we'll take a look at the WINS tab. The WINS tab is where you can enable forward lookup. This, if WINS is enabled in your network, if it's installed and configured, you can use it as a helper service to help resolve resources that might be in the beanlake.org zone or in that domain. This is done by first turning it on and then adding the IP address of the WINS server that will be asked. Remember once again that if the DNS server were to get a request for something like computer5.beanlake.org and computer5 was not in the zone file, then it would take the leftmost portion of that request, turn it into a query to the WINS server at whatever WINS server was added to this list. When you're done specifying some of the options from the properties of both the zone and the server, choose Apply to apply, and then OK. We're going to be back in these properties as we go throughout the rest of the chapter here, as we configure things like dynamic updates, and we change the zones from static to Active Directory integrated, and so on. So you'll see this again.